University track and field and cross country. So being a student athlete is a unique opportunity, and it's not something that everyone gets to experience. You know, kids all over the student athletes all over the world go to university, but not all of them get to continue their sport at that university level. And so being on a community with your team, being on a community with the athletic department, training and studying and oftentimes living together in the pursuit of bettering yourselves athletically while you get a higher education is such a special experience. And I know that that's why all of us are doing what we're doing today, because we want more student athletes to achieve and experience the amazing, tough, and you know, overall super worth it things that we all got to experience when we were at the university level, and just sharing more information about that. You know, everything is a level up. Academics, training, competition, the commitment level. School's going to get tougher, and you're going to have a more stringent training schedule. You're going to have to be more committed in your nutrition and getting your sleep. The travel schedule can be taxing, so you have to be prepared for that commitment, and that's part of university recruitment is being ready to challenge yourself in that aspect. What does one too far? What do we see? What does the landscape look like? In North America, there are 1,300 plus programs with track and field and cross country programs at their institutions. It's a lot. You know, 1,200 of those are in the US, and then we've got kind of 100 plus in Canada. So I want to talk a little bit about what the difference is in athletics in university in Canada and in the US. So in Canadian athletics, we sort of have two associations. The first is called U Sports, and that's the largest institution of sports, largest association in Canada, with the majority of the degree granting universities in this country. The second association is the CCAA. It's sort of a Canadian colleges association, and it encompasses more middle distance track and predominantly cross country, but it's something that we, you know, have learned a lot about, and something that I had no idea about in high school, so it's interesting there as well. In the USA, there's a number of other institutions and associations that you would have heard of. I assume NCAA, there's 3 divisions in the NCAA. There's another association called the NAIA, which also has multiple divisions. And then there are junior colleges in the NJCAA, again with multiple divisions. And all together, each association has their own guidelines, rules, written regulations. They all have their own different sets of competition schedules. They all have their own national championships, and everything is separate. As you know, in track and field, though, we travel, we compete at all sorts of different meets, and no matter where you compete, it's very likely that you would come across athletes from all over the continent and from all sorts of different associations. There are schools ranging from 800 students, or less than 1,000, I typically say, to over 50,000 students. UC, UT, those are kind of the biggest schools in Canada, and both of those are well north of 50,000 students. So, you know, those smaller schools, 800 students, oftentimes they're kind of private universities, and sometimes they're in rural areas. And so that's something that I think surprises people when they are going to look into different schools, how the size is something that you really need to consider. And then also athletic conditions can range a lot. Some institutions have brand new facilities every couple of years, things are popping up. And in other cases, you know, differences in funding, that sort of stuff, you need to also be kind of aware of what the facilities are looking at the schools that you're looking for. So what is recruitment? Recruitment, in many ways, is a courtship. It's two-sided. It's just as important in recruitment to be focusing on what's important for you as a student athlete, just as much as the school's going to be looking into you. And recruitment starts when any representative of a university or college program contacts you, your parents or guardian, or your high school or club coach with the intention of enrolling you in their school and adding you to their team's roster. So communication can happen in lots of different ways. And it kind of starts with the different people you would be communicating with. So the head coach is usually the decision maker. Then there's sometimes our event-specific coaches. The larger the programs, there might be dedicated recruiting staff that you'll communicate with. And then there's also an opportunity to speak with current and former student athletes to help form your opinion and hear about their experiences to learn more about the program. Sometimes recruitment works like a bit of a funnel, especially for the larger programs. The people you talk to in the very beginning might be someone like a dedicated recruiting staff that's there to sort of let you know more information about the program, share details about what training schedules look like and what dorm rooms look like, give you appropriate links so that you can do further research into academic programs and things like this. And as you move down the line, have phone conversations, maybe you even take a visit, which we'll talk about more later. Then you would start to speak to the coach that would be in charge of training and programming. You might also speak with academic advisors at this point. And then down the line, the head coach, could be your event coach, is ultimately the decision maker for kind of rosters and scholarships. And that's really the last person and the kind of the more bigger conversations will happen with the head coach at a university program. How will I connect with schools? University coaches, recruiting coordinators will do and use any avenue that they can to get in touch with athletes that they're interested in. You'll get an email, a phone call, letters in the mail. WhatsApp is really common, and Skype for video calls. They'll text you. They'll be looking at your social media. They'll be contacting you through social media. And then also they'll be using online recruiting platforms like Streamline Athletes. And then also they'll have you through, there we go. But the number one thing that I want to get across to you guys here is it's not just about being reached. Athletes in rural areas, athletes who have been multi-sport and are coming on later, or just athletes who haven't had a ton of exposure at big meets where, you know, coaches have been able to scour results pages and find their name and then successfully find their contact information. It can be a bit tedious on the coaching side. So it's very important that you guys understand that you have all the power in the world to go ahead and contact the schools that are interested in you, or sorry, that you're interested in, not just waiting for schools to determine if they're interested in you and reach out and kind of get that recruiting process started. You can do it on your own. And I think that's pretty special. So what should you start to consider when deciding where to go to school? Academics is the first. What do you want to study? What's the reputation and difficulty of the university and department where you can be accepted? What are the admissions requirements? I'm going to talk a little bit about the SAT and ACT. The SAT and ACT are entrance exams that are required by many American institutions and most American associations. So if you're interested in competing in the NCAA in divisions 1 or 2, you're required to sign up with their eligibility center, and you're required, no matter what the institution says, to complete an entrance exam, either the SAT or the ACT. If you're looking for more information on this, we can send out some information via email. But you need to be aware of what's required of you because these things take a lot of time and coordinating earlier on than you would expect. If you have a breakout cross-country season in your senior year and all of a sudden it's December and you're thinking, man, I may be able to get a scholarship. I think I want to go to the States. It can take time to study for the SAT or ACT, make sure that you're able to get the grade that you need in order to move forward in the process. And then also there's a lot of paperwork. And I don't think the test is kind of tough, but the paperwork itself, it's not a difficult thing, but it's time consuming and it really pays to be organized rather than leaving things to the last minute and being stressed. I think that's probably good on that end. On the athletic side, what association, division, or conference is the right fit for you? This is something that, especially in Canadian track and field, it can be a little convoluting. I think that the NCAA and track and field in America is a pretty divisive subject for Canadian track and field athletes. There's lots that go down and have a really fantastic experience, and they have the high pressure coaching environment that works for them. And you know, they go into that kind of pressure cooker system and they come out a total success story and they love it and it's the best thing ever and it's very, very glorified and they're super happy with their experience. And then other people hear kind of those horror stories where kids go down to the US and they don't have a good experience, whether they couldn't find an academic program that they needed at the school they went to, or they unsuccessfully transferred and lost a year of eligibility, which can happen if you're not careful about the rules, or just didn't have a good experience with the coaching staff or the team, which can happen anywhere. Then they kind of come home and that can scar people. What I'd like to instill in here is NCAA, D1, 2, and 3, NAIA, junior college, college in Canada, university in Canada, all are totally viable options. It's just about picking the path that makes the most sense for you as an individual, for your goals, academically and athletically, through university and beyond. So figuring out a region of the world that you want to compete in, understanding the implications of that, and then moving forward in a way that you know is going to serve you as an athlete. That's kind of a place to start. And understanding the nuanced differences between NCAA divisions and the rest of the associations. I can kind of sum it up for you. People see Division I as this holy grail, and that's the best spot to perform in track and field in North America and in university. And, you know, I was a Division I athlete. The level of competition was really high. But Division II, the way that I would describe it is the level of competition is very, very similar. You'll see similar performances across the different Division 1 and 2. What changes then is the depth of performance. And so there are lots of Division II schools that could totally be competing in Division I in track and field, but they happen to be Division II as an institutional decision, or because the football program belongs to Division II, and sometimes football programs are what fund a lot of the athletic departments. And so just sort of going like, oh, I want to go D1, D1, D1 is really not a holistic mindset. It's about the institution, the coaching opportunities that you have, the academic programs that are available to you, and then, you know, where in the world and you know, what event groups are available. They might have an absolutely stellar middle distance program, but you go show up for a visit and come to find that the ceiling in their indoor facility isn't even high enough for you to pole vault. And they didn't tell you that because they were curious to sign you and they wanted you to come for a visit and get wowed by the school. So there's all sorts of things that need to be considered, and all of these are questions that need to be asked. Location is another one. I sort of touched on this, but you know, are you someone that wants to live close to home? Maybe you live at home to university and you save a little money on rent, or do you want kind of an outer world experience where you just go somewhere else and you live on your own and you're in southern US, which is very different for me. You know, do you want the Vancouver rain, that environment to train in? You know, historically we have beautiful trails and things like that. You guys are mostly local, so I'm using this as an example. Or do you want to totally switch things up and go somewhere else in the country or in the continent? Do you want to stay in Canada or stay in the United States? There's 1,000 differences, but the main point is just deciding what's going to serve you best as an athlete and as an individual, and also as an academic. Yeah, the last point there was just kind of big city or college town. Do you prefer a more rural setting, set in nature? There's all sorts of...
Sorry guys, this TV hates my computer.
No worries. There's all sorts of things that come from that. And sometimes you can have a college campus that is in the middle of a big city and it's small undergraduate population. So it would be called a small school, but yet it's in a big city and you've got nightlife right next to you and, you know, all the shopping and whatever you could ever want. Or you might have a college town. Texas A&M University is a really, really big example of that. It's a huge institution with a gigantic athletic department and, you know, tons of other clubs and effects. And you're in a town that's almost entirely comprised of students. Sherbrooke is a perfect Canadian example of that. Sherbrooke is a city that has Stage-Ups, which is like a college in Quebec, and a university, University of Sherbrooke. And what is it, Alex? Like 75% of the population that lives in Sherbrooke? Oh, 1/3. 1/3 is student athletes or students?
Well, yeah, 50%. 50,000 of the population in Sherbrooke is students.
Okay.
One Stage-Ups and university.
50,000.
50,000, 150.
Out of 150.
So
Okay, 1/3. So it's crazy. So is that an experience that you want? Do you want to be surrounded by people that are in your sort of current life experience, or do you not really care about that at all? So those are some things that you also need to consider. Finances. So having a budget and a funding plan as an individual and also as a family is really important. You know, in some cases, your parents have no ability to help you financially. In other cases, they might have put money away or they're happy to front bill. You guys have to have that conversation as a family, and I highly recommend just being as open and frank about it as possibly can be, because finance surprises down the line hurt everybody. You know, do you want to budget on a monthly basis? Do you want to budget per semester based on the semester costs and tuition at school? Or do you want to budget all year long, understanding the entire year's costs and fees associated with yearly tuition at that institution. Tuition costs in Canada versus in the United States. So this is an important topic, especially with the exchange rate that we've got going on right now. Tuition in the US for out-of-state, or in our case, international student athletes and students in general, can be anywhere from sort of $10,000 a semester all the way up to $60,000, $70,000 a year US. And in Canada, those numbers, depending on if you're in province or out of province, there's sometimes altering fees, but those numbers are a little bit more like $3,000 a year to $10,000, $11,000 a year at a maximum Canadian dollars. And so pointing out that difference is important when we start to talk about financial aid and financial awards, particular athletic scholarships, because you have to understand the cost of university as a ratio and sort of the aid that you're getting as a ratio to the overall cost. Financial award and aids. We're going to talk about athletic scholarships a little bit later, but there's also academic money that can come into play. And that's why our number one tip for student athletes that are interested in finding funding for their university is to focus in school and do as best as you can do. Because whether it's an entrance exam score, your official transcripts when you report your grades, or extra opportunity for funding based on your writing skills and essays you might write, there are umpteen million opportunities out there for academic grants, aids, bursaries. But all of this can be unique to the university. It can be government funded. You can apply for it. Sometimes you just get awarded things because you signed up for something once and you saw your score. But it's really, really important to be aware of what's available to you. Most university websites have a financial aid and bursary section, and it's filled with a whole host of grants and scholarships that you can apply for. The earlier you get started on this, like with anything in recruitment, the better. Books and housing can be hidden costs. A lot of schools have sort of a cost calculator on their website, and that can be really helpful. It talks a little bit to you about the cost of living wherever, whatever city that you're looking at. But typically books and housing are on top of the tuition and fees that you pay directly to the university, because books and housing is completely dependent on what you choose. Are you going to live on campus? Are you going to live in a dorm? Would you rather have an apartment? Do you want to live on your own, or can you slum it with 8 roommates? Those are decisions that you're going to kind of have to make. Speaking of hidden costs, something that people sort of fail to think about sometimes can be travel costs. So it can feel really cool to get recruited to a school across the country or across the continent, and then you kind of come to find that, oh man, anytime I want to come home and see my family, it's $1,100 round trip. Especially in Canada, our flight costs are not favorable in that regard. So just be aware of hidden costs. Okay, so what about scholarships? I've got some notes I wanted to make sure I cover here. So differences in scholarships in Canada and in the US. Canadian scholarships cap at maximum books, tuition, and fees. No athletic financial award can go north of books, tuition, and fees. They cannot cover any of your housing, and they cannot cover any of your living costs. And that's just the way that it works. It's mostly a funding game. Universities in Canada rely directly on funding. And so in order to make things a little bit more fair across the nation, they cap athletic scholarship at books, tuition, and fees. In the US, on the other hand, in NCAA Division I, for example, they can pay for the whole thing. And a full ride in the US is books, tuition, fees, any of your housing, any of your living costs, and then, oftentimes subsidy for things like gear that you might need, and not that you don't get gear or team issue gear in Canada, but schools in the US can also offer a scholarship, other things like that. It's different in each of the associations. Just like I said earlier, every division, every association has its own nuances and goals, and that's why it's really important to understand kind of, especially if you're comparing schools in one and the other, understanding what those differences mean and why. And so a full ride in the US to a school that's going to cost you $50,000 a year, US, will cover the whole thing. You might have, your flights and extra living costs when you want to go to a concert, whatever, but a full ride in the US will cover the whole thing. The full rides are not the norm. It's very rare, and you have to be a pretty particular case in order to get that. And so I wanted to share a little bit about how the scholarship puzzle works, and it includes academic and it includes athletic scholarships as well. So in the NCAA, in Division I, university programs, as per NCAA rules, can offer a maximum of 12.6 full rides on the men's side to be divided at the coach's discretion amongst the entire team. So jumpers, throwers, middle distance athletes, steeplechasers, hurdlers, everybody, you get the vision. So if one student athlete has a full ride on the men's side, that means there's only 11.6 left to go around. Now, on the women's side, there's 18 in NCAA Division I. That's something that go us, I guess. Division II is very, very similar, and this is sort of a huge misconception. D1, I want to get as much money as I can get. That happens a lot. Division II has the same opportunity as far as the NCAA is concerned on the men's side, 12.6 scholarships to be divided amongst the whole team. On the women's side, that number drops to 12.6 in Division II. I made this point about that comes from the NCAA. That's a blanketed rule. That's the maximum available opportunity to give funding for those student athletes. Different areas of the country can make different rules for themselves, and also it's institution by institution. So just because a school could give 18 female full rides has no bearing on whether or not it actually can afford to. It also has no bearing on whether or not the coach is going to use that money in that way. So, oftentimes student athletes will reach out to schools, and we see a lot, if they're reaching out to schools in the States, they think they got some pretty good times and they're interested in that school, they reach out and the coach never gets back. And a lot of the time it's because the coach knows that that student athlete is international, and that coach is not going to be able to provide the funding necessary to make that school a reasonable cost for that student athlete. And so that's something that I'd like to point out. NCAA Division III is a little bit different. NCAA Division III is more of an academic focused division. And earlier I mentioned that there are schools in Division II that could totally compete in Division I. There are schools in Division III that could also totally compete in Division I, but because of other institutional differences or choices by the athletic department, they're in Division III. And that means they have no capability of offering any athletic financial award at all. Academically, I think the statistic is 75% or more of Division III student athletes do receive aid. It just comes from finances, it comes from grants, and it comes from other institutional means of finding funding, donors. That's what I mean by that. In the NAIA, which is another association, it's 12 and 12. So 12 maximum on the men's side and 12 maximum on the women's side. So there's a lot of money to go around if you're looking at institutions that have the full funding, or if you're looking at institutions that you will greatly exceed their sort of current roster capability, and you'll be able to do really, really well at the conference level or maybe even at the national level. That's kind of what getting a scholarship means. It means you're going to need to perform. It's greater pressure because suddenly now you've been paid to deliver on something. That kind of brings me down to scholarships not being a 4-year deal. This is another very common misconception. I hear a lot of the time, oh, my daughter, it's so great, she signed a 4-year full ride with X school. It's just not true. If that student athlete shows up on day one and continues to deliver, maybe they even progress, they stay eligible in school academically, which is the #1 recipe for success, yes, they probably will be offered the same scholarship year over year. But it's important to remember that these scholarships are up for debate and up for a choice by the university coach. Typically, the head coach makes those decisions to either increase if you've done better and exceeded expectations or met expectations in a conversation that you knew that the scholarship could increase if you achieve those things. It can also be rescinded in part or in full. And getting your scholarship taken away in full typically comes after some pretty serious implications, and there should be a lot of stones down the road before that actually happens. Typically it's because you're no longer academically eligible. In some cases it's because you got a career-ending injury outside of the track and field department. But the NCAA has, and all associations have many rules in place to protect athletes from being exploited and having their scholarships taken away for unjust reasons. You're not going to get your scholarship reduced to 0 because you didn't PR every meet in your first year. It's just important. They're looking for consistency, and they're looking for you to sort of deliver on what it is that you guys have promised. And so my advice here is just be very, very clear on what the expectations are in the implications of those scholarships. So if you've been offered any denomination of money, let's say you've been offered $1,000 to train at the U of S and compete for the U of S in Saskatchewan, you might sit down with the coach during your kind of scholarship and signing conversations and say, you know, $1,000 is awesome, thank you so much. I want to accept this offer, but what can I do in the future to increase that number? Or, you know, what do I have to do to make sure that I can continue to get the scholarship year after year after year? And I think just being prepared and knowing who you are and knowing what you bring to the table and being prepared to have those conversations that might be a little bit tough, so that you can have a full picture of what you're signing and what it means for you down the line if things, you know, go a little bit awry. Another thing, that scholarships are a puzzle, academic and athletic scholarships. For example, myself, I can speak to this. I had a scholarship that covered my full tuition and fees and books and everything. And that was fantastic, but it wasn't all athletic money. I was a pretty good athlete, but I was prepared academically, and luckily for me, the SAT score that I got allowed me some funding from the institution. I also applied for bursaries, and that was both with the Canadian government and also with the university that I wanted to go to. And that's because I knew I needed to fund my school. I knew I couldn't pay for it, and I knew I wanted to go down south, and it was a lot more expensive. Out of pocket, my school would have been $40,000 a year before housing and living costs. So don't be discouraged if a coach only offers you X value and you feel your performances are higher, as long as the conversation on the table is, you know, we're going to look for some academic money for you and they're going to help you through that process. And it's all a puzzle. The coach has a budget to work with. I find it's just important to note there's no reason to be offended about these things. Money is a tough subject for lots of people, but it's just important to be kind of aware that there are lots of things at play, both for them and also for you. And if you feel you're not getting an offer that's going to allow you to fund your education totally from the athletic department, then put your thinking caps on and start doing some research into the academic side of stuff. What do coaches need to know about me? I told you earlier that you have full power to contact institutions that are in your wheelhouse and that interest you. We always advise you to make it as easy as you possibly can. Basic contact information, athletic info, your performances with proof. Anyone can say that they ran 2:07 in grade 11, 800 meter for a female, but it's another story. Mood lighting. There we go. It's another story to have the results link to back it up. So always do yourself a favor and provide results links, video footage if you have it, if your race was filmed or you've done some technique filming at practice, include it, absolutely include it. And then any academic info, grades, with proof if you have it. Unofficial transcript, you're gonna need to include your transcript later on anyways. It's really not difficult to ask your high school for it. It sounds like a big job, it's not. Everyone will help you. It's very common, they do it all the time in admissions offices. So get your unofficial transcript, include it with schools that you're super interested in, and then any extra information that could be relevant. Coaches at university programs need to know your training history. It's not just about, track and field is black and white in the sense of you ran the time that you ran or you jumped as far as you did or as high as you did, but there's a lot of nuanced details that go in. Have you been injured lately? Is there something that you're recovering from? Was there something that prevented you from doing your best last year? And you can include personal details, maybe a little bit down the line, a conversation on the phone with a coach. You can share about something that happened in your family that prevented you from doing your best, or maybe you're a multi-sport athlete. They love to hear that student athletes have more than one sport experience, and sometimes that can kind of make up for a gap in progression. So make sure to include that. And then also, something to look out for, coaches at the university level should totally be invested in figuring out what's going on with their training, and half of that is talking to your coaches, your club coaches and your high school coaches. So, brief them, hey, I'm gonna send your information off to this school and this school, if that's okay with you, and they might be giving you a call to check in on what I've been up to. It's nothing to be nervous, your coaches probably all love you anyways. Any highlights? Some coaches really, really want to know about extracurriculars. You know, it just doesn't hurt to include it. If you volunteer anywhere, that's awesome. If you're, you know, on the debate team, if you do other stuff around the community or in your school, you take yearbook classes, you experience with people in other realms other than in sport, but also the sport highlights. You know, did you win most valuable player? Did you win, you know, most sportsmanlike award? Those things are super, super valuable, and it speaks to your character. And then add some personality, be yourself. Coaches get thousands of emails all the time from prospective student athletes with varying degrees of information, you know, everything from, my name's Mark, I want to come to your school, to a full detailed athlete profile. So it's a lot to sit through. And if you can do anything for yourself, we just suggest that you find a way to stand out. And usually that comes from being honest, being open, and being yourself. The next step in recruitment after this initial communication and somehow getting in touch, whether by phone or through you know, connection from your club coach or your high school administrator, is typically to establish a fit and figure out what about that program really interests you, and then why that program should be interested in you. And then the next step would be to kind of hop on a phone call or a video call. And this stuff can come quite quickly, and I know it can be nerve-wracking. So wrap your head around that early on, because you're gonna have to talk to these people at some point. You're gonna be spending almost every day with them for 4 to 5 years, 6, sometimes 7 in youth sports. And that's something to be aware of. So you have to really like each other. And it's so important that you as a student athlete feel a connection to that coach, and, you know, and to your academic advisors or potential academic advisors, and to the people who would potentially be your teammates. So recruiting is scary, but it's not if you feel like, man, I have the power, I can do this. I can figure out what I want, and I can show coaches what I want, and then they can kind of either reflect that, or I can move forward and find the ones that will. Do you guys have any questions for me so far? I'm going quickly, yes?
I was just gonna say, I know in BC which schools are part of NCAA. What about rest of Canada?
Okay, so BC is unique. We have 2 schools that compete in American institutions or American associations. That's Simon Fraser University is Canada's only NCAA school, and they compete in Division 2. And then UBC competes. I didn't even explain about the seasons. This is perfect. Thank you for asking that question. UBC competes in U Sports, which is that Canadian association we discussed, during cross-country season in the fall. And then all their track and field in indoor and in outdoor is done in the NAIA. And those are the only 2 schools in Canada that compete in American institutions. Everybody else is either part of U Sports or the CCAA. Some of the bigger differences, or a really big difference that I didn't discuss about NCAA, NAIA versus U Sports and what we have in Canada, is that there's eligibility differences, and then there's also competition schedule differences. And a lot of people don't know this. In U Sports, university varsity programs do not sponsor an outdoor track and field program at any school other than NCAA Division 2 school Simon Fraser and NAIA school UBC. Those are the only 2 programs in Canada that sponsor outdoor track and field as a varsity sport. And the reason for that is U Sports has adopted more of a uniformed and aligning with Athletics Canada's vision for a competition schedule, which is allowing student athletes to run cross country and outdoor, and then focus in indoor. That's the only track and field that they do is in indoor, giving student athletes a chance to perform well at their championships, and then take a little bit of a step back from athletics, focus on finishing the year strong academically, and then take a little bit of a break and be prepared to do well in Canadian competition. So your provincial championships, your national championships, with the ultimate goal of, you know, pushing people to be their best, to make national teams and perform well on the international stage. And that's a breath of fresh air for a lot of people. There is something to be said in America, in the US institutions and associations. They're gonna ask for you to be at your best 3 times for national championships. And once in cross country, if you're a middle distance athlete, once in indoor, and then once again at the end of the year after you've finished exams. So everyone else has left the building, you've finished your exams, and you're there at university continuing to train, to grind, and ramping up for another national championship at the end of May. So it can be a lot to ask of the body. Or is it even later than that? It's June. June. I was gonna say May, that's like conference. It's Tuesday. May. Okay. So a bit of a difference in the competition schedules between the institutions. But yes, they're going to ask you to be at your best at nationals. I do want to dial it back though, because many people that compete in American institutions don't make it to nationals. I've never made it even close. Many schools, and this speaks to sort of opportunity for scholarship or just finding the right fit for you. Many schools, often you'd hear them be called mid-major university programs. Their focus is on peaking their athletes and performing best at their conference championships. And then from conference, you would then qualify to regional championships. And that jump, making it from conference to regionals, can be, the ultimate goal for so many student athletes. And then from there, you would then make it to nationals. And if you're someone that's on the cusp of making it, now you're peaking, maybe you PR at conference and make it to regionals, and then you get another PB, and now you made it to nationals. And now you've been in peak mode for more than a month. And so for some student athletes, it's a high pressure environment that just doesn't work. And that is where injury can happen. And that is where feeling burnt out can happen. Having said that, just like I said before, it's finding the path that's best for you, because there's tons of athletes that thrive in that high competition environment, need a pressure cooker system, kind of push themselves and rise to the top. And that's how their best performances kind of come about. But looking inside and asking yourself some tough questions and determining who you are and kind of who you want to be and how you want to see your university schedules lining up can be the difference maker in deciding if U Sports is an avenue for you, or if exploring an American association is best. The second difference that I mentioned is in eligibility. In U Sports competition, you can compete for 5 full years, and there's no age cap, which means if you take a couple years off after high school, maybe you're working for your dad's company, and then you figure, man, I'm going to go get an education, here I go. You can start those competition seasons whenever you enter that institution, and you're home free all the way through your years of eligibility. There's also a bit more leniency than American associations as far as taking time off and redshirting and having gaps for injuries, or maybe you want to go on exchange somewhere else. There's tons of reasons why people need to take breaks, and U Sports allows a little bit more, a bigger avenue for that. In the NCAA, you start to lose years of eligibility, of which you have 4, after 1 year graduation from high school. CJEP is a college system in Quebec. It's a little bit different. You don't really need to touch on that, but for anyone who knows about Quebec, there you go. So if you graduate and you don't go to school right away and you're training, and then you go to the NCAA or NAIA a year later, 2 years later, you've begun to lose your eligibility. So you have 1 year to start, your clock begins, you have 5 years to finish at that point. And so if you redshirt a year, that's one. And redshirting, that means taking time off. Yeah, I was going to say that's jargon. Redshirting is taking time off for a reason deemed appropriate by you, your coach, and your institution. It has to be approved by the NCAA. You can medically redshirt if you get hurt, or you can choose to redshirt for a whole host of reasons that's going to come later on. But the point is, you start to your clock ticks down, and if something happens, you redshirt because you want to just use cross country as a base. You don't want to compete. You just want to focus on indoor track that year. And then next cross country season, you get hurt and you can't compete. You've now lost that eligibility year in an American association.
Can I add one thing?
Yes.
U Sports. Lots of the time when we talk about competing in, say, in Canada, people get a little bit turned away by the fact that there's no outdoor season. But this being said, you do compete for your university, represent your school during the indoor season, but most programs in Canada that compete in U Sports do have a club that's associated to the university in some form or another. So you continue to train with the same training group and the same coaching staff in most cases, but it's another thing that you kind of just need to check out if you're exploring the Canadian landscape, just because it can vary from school to school. So the club season begins and your club could very well be attached to your university program, but it's important to make sure you know that beforehand, and just to explore that, what the club season would look like for you if you'd still be studying for another month or so.
They often wear similar colors, school colors, and have a similar name to the university. It's just that U Sports as an association does not sponsor outdoor track and field as a varsity sport with the program.
Just with regards to the timing of these contacts, like, I mean, if you were obviously grade 11 now, when would you, or you were 12 now, when would you recommend sort of starting to reach out?
Great question. So recruiting looks different depending on how old you are, what grade you're in, or what situation you're kind of experiencing. Youth sports has less rules in recruiting. It's just kind of a fact. So coaches can reach out to athletes at a much younger age than in the NCAA. NAIA has slightly less strict rules than the NCAA, but I'm going to talk specifically about the NCAA because it gives a framework to kind of work backwards. So NCAA has the most stringent rules. Coaches and institution, anyone who's associated with the athletic department or the program, they cannot begin officially recruiting you or recruiting student athletes until June heading into grade 11 year. And so, June grade 10?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
For unofficial conversational.
Yeah. Saying hi at a track meet, sending interest notes, that sort of stuff can happen, but productive conversations begin in grade 11. Is that fair? Official visits cannot begin until June. And so visits, you can choose to go with the family and visit a school anywhere in North America anytime you want. Get a feel for the campus, see if you can see yourself living there, eating lunch in the courtyard, walking to the library, whatever. You can also set up visits with the university itself, getting a proper tour, maybe meeting with an academic advisor. All of those things you can take upon yourselves as student athletes and families and start to do those things when you like. As soon as you want to get the coaches involved, anything official can't begin until grade 11 or June of grade 11 year in your in the NCAA Division 1 and 2 specifically. In youth sports, it can happen a lot earlier. And so sometimes, like the kind of a cadence that we would sort of suggest, if you're in grade 9 and grade 10 and you're thinking about things already and you already have a pretty good idea of the types of schools that you'd like to consider, then there is absolutely no harm in sending a note to the head coach or the event coach at the school you're looking at and saying, hey, here's who I am, here are my specs right now, here's what I'm interested in studying potentially, and here's why I'm interested in your school. For NCAA institutions, in some cases, if you're too young, they can't even reply to you, but it's still potentially you're now on their radar. And then as you move forward, American institutions typically recruit starting in kind of grade 11 year, second semester grade 11 year, things get ramped up, and then official visits can begin in grade 11, but typically they happen sort of end of grade 11, summertime, and fall of the grade 12 year. And then in the NCAA, there's also sort of different signing periods. And so there's different times when coaches can and cannot communicate with you and your family. And then there's different times when, if you're so excited and ready to go and you're done, you found your school, there's certain dates that you can follow as far as when you can commit and sign and move towards what's called a letter of intent. It means different things, it's called different things in different associations. But the whole point about the signing period, you've probably heard this, oh, I signed with this school or I committed to that school. Verbally committing, you can do at any point. It's not binding. You're totally safe to go. Actually, never mind. And national letter of intent in the US is a little bit more binding. But you basically just sign, and it's an agreement between you and the university and the athletic department saying we're going to move forward with this relationship, and the student athlete's going to begin with us in the fall or whenever you're going to start school. In youth sports, things are more relaxed. Conversations can happen more freely, and there's not as much pressure as far as for coaches to be like following strict contact rules. It doesn't mean that they're going to be any less professional by any means. It's just about the timing when you can be reached, and then kind of when you can expect to be reached. It's a bit funny that there's all these relaxations in the rules and they could contact you earlier or whatever, because a huge norm in Canadian track and field is not recruiting until grade 12 year, staying focused on the up and coming recruiting class. Some coaches are a little bit more on the ball, and they'll talk to you in grade 11, they'll say hi to you at meets in grade 10, but they probably have their eyes on you, or they've categorized you if you are probably a fit for their program. They just might not be having, productive conversations with you before grade 12. Does that answer your question?
A question on that. So lots of schools, early admissions are due end of November, beginning of December. Do things like that come in before those early admissions are due, or do you still do all of that process as well?
Do conversations happen before early admissions? That would ask me? Totally, yeah. So in a lot of cases, that scholarship puzzle that we talked about, or the funding puzzle, you might not be a student athlete that they can provide athletic financial award for, but it doesn't mean that they're not going to help you get funding to come to their institution. Walking on is a student athlete who comes onto the roster and doesn't have any athletic financial money or athletic financial award, but the coaches are still going to be super happy to have you. I mean, rosters would be very, very small without walk-on athletes, and so they're going to do their best to support you. And a lot of time with early admissions comes that early opportunity for bursaries, grants and aid in the U.S. Well, you guys aren't Americans, never mind, but there's other grants and things that you can apply for, but the same exists in Canada. And the earlier that you're on the ball, if you get all that stuff done before early admission, now here you are in November, committed to school, you've already got the grants or the aid that you need, and you already know that you're accepted and it's November and you're done. And people who have that experience probably have a really good second semester, grade 12. Alex.
Yeah, a lot of coaches will already have an idea if you didn't get this program. Depending on maybe if you're applying for really top programs and maybe you're on the line, they might say, here's a scholarship, we'd like to go on a team. It's conditional that you get into the school.
Right.
But 90% of the time, it's already, you're already able to get into the school. And you have the criteria and they know. They can do their job for 10 years. If you're on the fence, they will let you know. Otherwise, it's all obviously conditional to get accepted. So it's not able to February, March, but you could have signed the school in November. And it's just a matter of paperwork to wait in the school.
Right.
And obviously, if you start your classroom with grade 12 and it's a catastrophic happening, and then you pass and continue.
Just to make sure that the folks joining us online heard that, the question was, what about early admissions and getting accepted and signing early and scholarships early? Any signing, any scholarship value, any academic money too, is totally conditional on your acceptance to that university. So if you sign with the school in November and a catastrophe happens and you suddenly don't get into that university, the aid, the athletic financial award will be kind of null and void. Yeah.
Are you, I mean, if you do sign though, because I know NCAA is quite strict on deciding once you're signed, you're signed. If you sign and then you don't get into the school, are you still signed or can you go somewhere else?
They are working on these rules, but in general, if you sign with an institution and you no longer, you break that contract in some way, you no longer want to attend that institution, or I believe you might have a thought on this, but I believe if you don't get into the institution and then you go to a different school, you are kind of breaking that national letter of intent, which is a fairly binding contract, and it sometimes results in losing a year of eligibility at that new school, which just means you have to sit out. You can attend the institution, you can study, train with the team, but you cannot compete wearing that university jersey. And in some cases, it makes it tough for coaches to give you scholarships if you're showing up and sitting out for a whole year.
Allison, I'm sorry, just a request that you repeat the questions coming from the back.
Sure, okay, got it.
Most coaches, if they really think that you're on the fence, they will, I think you have to be clear with them, but they will make you sign it and then make you allow people to compete with this. And the letter of intent of a lie in youth sports, it means that they're doing it just for to make the athlete sign and feel good about it, but you can do it anywhere. They still have to make a lot of it on it to make it more official in youth sports, but
So that last question was about signing a national letter of intent and how binding is it, and what does it mean in different associations if you have to break that letter of intent for some reason. And we were sort of explaining that in the NCAA, like I said, you can potentially lose years of eligibility, a year of eligibility, have to sit out. If you break that contract, that's a little bit more binding. In youth sports, for example, the letter of intent effectively is a really cool way to show your excitement about signing for a university, but it's not binding in any way. If you change your mind, you know, anything from not getting into school, getting into a school you didn't think you'd get into and changing your mind, family event that makes you want to stay closer to home, you're not going to be penalized in youth sports, either academically or in eligibility standpoint, by breaking that contract that I would call a celebratory contract.
Yeah, two quick thoughts. Just one of them, strongly recommend not verbally committing or signing an LOI unless you have like 99.9% intent on attending that institution. It's just, even if it's not a legally binding contract or a verbal commitment to that coach, it's still, in Canada especially, a small track and field community, and the last thing you want is to be the person who bailed on an LOI or a verbal commitment. And then my second thought was just going back to the signing periods in November and then admissions happening later on. There's kind of two signing periods that happen where it's really busy, and they're both surrounding admissions dates kind of for a reason. So usually the coach will be quite certain that if you're being offered a LOI for their school, that you will be being admitted very shortly, or you've already been admitted. Yeah, that's just kind of one of those signing periods happen at those times of the year.
And in many cases, there will be pressure surrounding those signing periods. If you've been in communication with a coach for a really long time and they kind of want to lock you up because they're excited about you, there's all sorts of tactics. Not all coaches are put pressure in any way, but some do. And it's just important to make sure that you're constantly checking with yourself. Okay, here we're at with this relationship. And I agree independently. If this coach hadn't asked me to sign any sort of contract, I would independently say, yes, this is the program that I want to go to. And if you really feel that way, then I would say it would be an option to move forward and sign that letter of intent.